Welcome back to the BestWorst44 podcast. I'm your host, Joshua Leland. My next guest is the Associate Dean for Students at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. With well over a decade in teaching and administrative experience, she has carried previous roles as a public information consultant, adjunct instructor, and director for community and civic engagement. She received her BA degree in speech communication and rhetoric at Berea College in Kentucky, and her MA at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro in communication studies. She also received her doctorate in higher education administration at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. I'm excited to reconnect with her and hear more about her story and so much more. Welcome, Christie Poteet.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you, Dr. Poteet.
Yes.
Doctor. All right. So, a lot of our listeners are from all over the country. And so it would be great for them to learn a little bit more about your role in higher education. So what do you currently do at your role at University of North Carolina, Pembroke?
Well, I am the Associate Dean of Students. That's a new role for me. It's a new role for the university too, actually. In March of this year, I was appointed to this role after serving as the Director of the Office for Community and Civic Engagement for 7 years. And then prior to that is the Associate Director for Service Learning and Community Engagement. So I was in that office for about 14 years and then moved into this role just recently. And this role, now I look for opportunities to support professional development for the Division of Student Affairs. And then I also support assessment for the Division of Student Affairs, and then provide some general oversight for my previous office, the Office for Community and Civic Engagement, the Career Center, and Student Inclusion and Diversity. So those three areas, to me and to my Vice Chancellor, really focus on helping students think about how the co-curricular experience is connected to their academic learning and working on academic partnerships. So that's really where I'm focused now, and then supporting professional development for my colleagues and thinking about how we can get people to where they want to be and support them in their professional growth. And then also students, and looking at student employment and how can we continue to support students in their growth. And then assessment and making sure that all of the work that we're doing is telling a great story about how we're contributing to the overall educational value that we're providing at UNCP.
I appreciate that. If I can imagine when people think of the college experience, they think of professors and classrooms, but you and I both know that there's more to that experience. There's a ton of people that students have to interact with outside of the classroom. It sounds like your portfolio really supports a lot of the positions and leaders who support students outside of the classroom.
Yes, it does. Selfishly, sometimes I say that we're probably one of the most important components of a college campus because, the degree that you're getting, the education that you're getting is stellar. That's going to be the case almost anywhere. What really keeps students on a college campus most of the time, unless you have a very specific or unique program, but if the students are coming to get a history degree or a social work degree, then, we provide that quality education, of course, inside the classroom, but what really helps students connect and learn and stay engaged on a college campus are the experiences that we provide for them outside of the classroom and help them see how what they're learning in the classroom makes a significant difference in their lives and in the lives of others. So providing students with those opportunities to connect that theory and practice really helps them think about how what they're doing in the classroom makes sense in the quote unquote real world or wherever they want to end up after college, and helps them to start thinking about how they can apply that knowledge that they're learning in a way that moves them forward to meet their own goals and help them achieve the success that they want to achieve, and then to also make an impact in the lives of others. So, sometimes I think people think of student affairs work as maybe just planning carnivals and festivals or concerts, and we do that because we're fun people. Getting student affairs if you're boring. So the fun people go to student affairs. But we also think about, why are we doing that? What's the purpose of a festival? when you first get to campus. And it's really to create a sense of belonging and to help students think about, how they see themselves here, and introducing them to the traditions of your campus and helping them build that affinity, not just so they, say go Braves at UNCP, but so that they are seeing themselves as a part of this community and how they're contributing and what their legacy is going to be here and how they're going to contribute to this community and communities moving forward. So the work that we do in student affairs is very important to the overall education of students in many different ways.
That's a great way to frame it. And I also appreciate the idea of really the connecting point between what they're learning in the classroom and how it applies in areas outside of the classroom, because I think the value proposition of getting a college degree can be at question at times for many people. And so I love the idea of helping people, really us being a significant connecting point in all the areas that you do that with. I'm also thinking at UNCP in particular, I remember my experience working with y'all from my first leadership, that their age range of students at the undergraduate level was so unique. It's, everybody from 18 to 80. I don't know. It's a pretty big range of people who are first-time college students getting their college degree. So I have a question for you. This is kind of off script here, but if this is kind of two parts. So the first part is, I'll start with this one. You're talking to an 18-year-old student, or maybe for some of the parents listening, to their 18-year-old who's getting ready to go to college. What piece of advice would you give a college student in order to find success in their transition, or just success in general to college? What piece of advice would you give a brand new student who's 18 years old?
I would say don't choose a major until you have had opportunities to explore your passions and your interest. Don't come in with one thing in mind of what you want to do in life. So in my own personal experience, I knew that I wanted to create change in the world and I wanted to be an advocate for others. So I was going to be a lawyer and no one was going to tell me different. I knew I wanted to be a lawyer since I was 5 years old. I've been talking about it since then. I had a plan. Until I started dibbling and dabbling in that. And I was like, this is actually kind of boring. Maybe this is not what I want to do, because it is not like Law and Order. Okay. So I don't really like writing briefs and, all of those things. And I thought, how else can I create change? And I was actually introduced to a service learning course. And I started thinking about, okay, in this service learning course, I'm applying what I'm learning in a way that makes sense. And it helps me make sense of the information that I'm learning. And I was in communication because, again, I was going to be a lawyer. And at that time, communication was, really one of those ways that helped you think to form arguments and, logic and all of these things. So I stayed with that major, but I really started thinking about, okay, what are my passions? What are my strengths? What am I good at? And how can I use this to create change? And it kind of opened my eyes to so many other possibilities. But I was already kind of stuck in a major because I came in as an 18-year-old with a plan and no one was going to tell me different. That's exactly what I was going to do. And my mom, no one could tell me anything other than what I had planned. So I would say to an 18-year-old, give yourself some space to grow. Give yourself an opportunity to explore, do internships, get an on-campus job, join a club and organization, try new things. Go to take classes that you thought you would never be interested in. Really think about and push yourself and challenge yourself to consider, what are all of the opportunities? I didn't know that my job even existed as the director of CCE, or Community and Civic Engagement, until I applied for it. So you don't know what all of the opportunities and possibilities are. And that's what college is good for.
Thank you for sharing that. I think we put so much pressure on 18-year-olds to make a lifelong decision when it comes to picking a major and figuring out what they want to do the rest of their lives. And so for any parents who are listening, you may have a plan for your kid. Your kid's going to med school or law school like Christie thought that you were going to go to, or maybe your student is going to be a teacher. But you're absolutely right. Parents, would you also force your 18-year-old, culturally speaking from a Western perspective, into making a lifelong decision when it comes to a partner or being a parent right away at 18 or anything else? These are there's a lot to experience in life. And even for the folks who don't go to college, right? They even know. They go through so many different careers and try different things out. Nobody really has it all figured out at 18. There are adults, there's no doubt about that. But to put so much pressure on our young people to have it all figured out at age 18, I think is doesn't make sense for most students who enter college. That's the reason why most college students change their majors, or many of them change their majors multiple times. And I love the fact that you and I both didn't start in this path. We never knew that we were going to be college administrators, and that's kind of a part of it as well. So Yeah. So I put a little note here. Um, Make sure that you give yourself space to grow. And so that's great advice for our young people and for our parents of young people who are getting ready to go. Okay. So the second part of this question I promised you is um, for older or returning students. So these are students who may have had a degree in the past and are returning because they want to get further education, or maybe they're at a point where they finally have found some space and an opportunity to return to school. And so they're 25, 30, 35, 40, 50 plus. What advice do you have for those students? Because I know you work with some of those students as well. So what advice do you have for those students?
In many ways, it's very similar. Right now, I'm teaching a leadership course in the Bachelor's of Interdisciplinary Studies. And those students, most of them are returning adult learners who are really just needing the degree so that they can move further in their career. Some of them are wanting to change careers, change directions completely. But even those students who are pretty set in what they want to do and they're just looking for an opportunity to grow in what they like, I still encourage them to challenge themselves to think about all the possibilities to grow in that career. So maybe you only considered one way to get to where you want to be. But if you maybe looked at a different course or you looked at a different experience, how could that move you forward? And while I don't necessarily encourage students at that age to get involved in clubs or organizations, because that's not serving their need and we don't need to pretend like it is, I do encourage them to take advantage of the services that we provide, like the Career Center on our campus, who our responsibility is to help you think differently about the skill set that you have and the strengths that you have and how that might already open up some doors for you that you weren't thinking about before. So again, giving yourself that space to grow, even if you're 55 and think that there's no way, there's nothing different. My mom actually graduated college after I did. So I'm a first generation college graduate, but then my mom graduated shortly after I got my master's degree. And so she was an adult learner. And at that time, we were pretty low income when I was growing up. And she at sometimes worked 3 jobs at fast food restaurants and doing other things just to survive. And then whenever she got her degree, it completely changed the trajectory of her life at she was probably 45 at the time, and propelled her forward in a way that I'm not even sure that she knew was possible. And so now she's in a completely different place in life because she took that opportunity to challenge herself, to grow, and to think about things differently at 45.
Thank you for sharing that story. It's interesting. I've talked to a lot of people who think it's just too late for them to return to school. And when my mother was living, she said to me, in her 60s and 70s, like, oh, I think I want to eventually finish my college degree. And unfortunately, she never got a chance to do that. But I always think, well, just do it, right? Just go for it. And so I can appreciate somebody who's that far along and has a daughter in school and actually getting a graduate degree, having the courage to step out there and go ahead and do it anyway, and taking advantage of that opportunity. Higher education still counts. It still, changes the trajectory as you shared. Of course, statistically, how much you can make in earnings over a lifetime or being able to do things is really helpful. And also just the college experience of learning how to learn, and critical thinking and just the relationships you develop throughout that process, no matter what age you're at, it can be very valuable. I also, just speaking of your mother, I'd love to learn a little bit more about kind of your background, whatever you feel comfortable sharing about your upbringing, kind of where you're from and anything else.
Sure. Well, I'm originally from Cleveland, Tennessee. Well, I would say that I'm from a small town called Benton, Tennessee. But no one ever knows where Benton, Tennessee is. They usually don't know where Cleveland is. So I have to say somewhere near Chattanooga. I'm from the Appalachian Mountain region, the Cherokee National Forest, Great Smoky Mountains. All of that is where I grew up. And I already mentioned that, my family, we were low income when I was growing up, and a single parent household. And it was just me and my mom for a while. And then when I was 15, she had a baby, my brother, who is my world, but because I'm 15 years older than him. So, it's a different dynamic between brother and sister, but he is very much my heart. And that changed our lives a little bit. So at that time, I was working when I was 16, working 2 and 3 jobs sometimes. My mom was working as much as she could just to survive. And my mom always told me, no matter where we were in life, no matter, if we were transitioning from one apartment complex to the other, or, having to move in with my grandmother or whatever was happening in our life, she always reminded me, if you don't want this life forever, you have to get an education. That is your only way out of poverty. And I remember from like the time I was 5 years old, her reminding me constantly, like, this is the way for you. You're smart, you're capable, this is what you need to do. And so I think that propelled me forward in a way. And even though she and I both decided I was going to be a lawyer, like that was the plan. Yeah. And that's how I was going to get us out of poverty. I'd blame her for that now, because I'm like, no wonder I'm not a lawyer. You told me education was the way. And of course I'm an educator. You told me since I was 5 that that's how I got out of poverty. And so that is what moved us forward. And in the end, that's what moved her forward too, out of poverty. So it shouldn't be a big surprise to anyone that I ended up in education, because that was the way that I found a path to improve the quality of life for my family. And now, so then I went to Berea College. And if you know anything about Berea College, it is the most wonderful place. If you don't know, please research it. I could spend a whole hour on just Berea College and the experience there. But basically, if I could sum it up in one sentence, it's the poor people's Harvard. It's for low-income people from the Appalachian region, but you can be from anywhere and go there. But you can't pay to go to Berea College. Like your parents can't make over a certain income. And it gives opportunities for people like me who value education, but maybe can't afford an education, to take advantage of opportunities, to push myself, to grow, to learn. We always tell people that, I was told the way out of poverty is an education, but no one told me how to pay for it. No one told me how I was going to actually, be able to afford to live in a residence hall or pay for food. And Berea took all of those obstacles away from me and just let me concentrate on being a good student. But Berea College is also focused on service. They're focused on work. They're focused on creating change. They're focused on equity. They're focused on social justice. And so, again, is it any surprise that I left Berea College and looked for an opportunity to combine education and social justice and service work together? So that's what got me to the place of thinking about how I can do this work forever. And I found a job at UNCP with community and civic engagement, and really found a love and a way to combine my passions for service and education in a way that helps other students like me. And UNCP is such a special place because the students here are very much like the students at Berea, hungry for an opportunity. A lot of first generation college students, low income. We are a minority serving institution, historically Native American institution, founded for and by American Indians, so that to train American Indian educators. The community is very much an important part of who we are as an institution, our identity, our connection. The students here need advocates. They need people who help them navigate the ways of higher ed in a system that was not built for them. I would even argue maybe built to exclude them. But now they're here and we need to support them. So my reason for being at UNCP is because it gave me an opportunity to combine my passions. And then I found that these students are very similar to the student that I was. And I love being here with them. I love being an advocate for them. I love helping them think about ways to explore their passions and to create change, and to help them think about how they can use their strengths and skills to move themselves forward, to move their families forward, to move their communities forward in a way that makes sense for where they want to be.
It's interesting that the seed that your mom planted a long time ago, even if it didn't bloom the way that you both had anticipated, it kind of did. It's almost like The Secret, how they say, whatever you focus on specifically is what you attract, and for you, it's like education, and then you never left. You end up going into it. I also, I got to say, I hear the passion that you have, not only for your experience at Berea and the type of students that are attracted there, and what that institution does for people who might not necessarily be able to afford the overall college experience, but also to your passion for the students at UNCP and how being able to give back through your career is really the dream. It's that Buckner quote of where where your, I guess, something about your gladness meets the world's deepest needs or whatever. Just the idea of your passion, your interest, your avocation is meeting something that's needed by the world. And so if you can find that in a career, it's a wonderful life to have. So I really appreciate you sharing that. It's funny, the influence our parents really put on us. I mean, education being such a critical piece, and I just, it's at certain times of our we study, and work with college kids. Their peers can be such a big influence, but parents never should underestimate those seeds that they've planted and how deeply they really connect with us and how they show up when we need them. I think it sounds like your mom's kind of seeds that she planted really showed up for you when you really needed it and gave you some really good guidance.
It did. It absolutely did. And I would also say, speaking of peers, that, at Berea, I can think of almost everyone that I graduated with has a similar job to mine. And and so they're doing something in nonprofit or social work or education. And so those seeds that are planted early on, when you water them in a way that is supportive and encouraging and helps them see a difference. And, what service learning did for me was my first service learning class was in mathematical modeling. And I was like, what? Like, this is awful. Like cosine and sine. I don't even know what this means or, whatever. So it was awful. But we focused on how we use that information to calculate our ecological footprint on the world. And in that moment, math made so much sense to me because it was teaching me how to apply what I was learning to something that mattered. And I was like, this is beautiful. Like, not really. I'd never use that again, but math. But the concept of taking what you're learning in a way that matters in the world, wow, that's powerful. And so when we plant those seeds, and that's what my mom did too, right? So that's really what educators do, is planting that seed to help you see how your strengths, your skills matter in the world. And what you do with that to create change or to improve the quality of life for others is your purpose. So you take your skills, your strengths, your passions, and what the world needs, as you said, and what's in the center is your purpose. And when you find that, it's like a breath of fresh air. Yeah. This is why I'm here. So,
absolutely.
Yes, I agree with everything you said about it.
Okay, so before we take a break and get to the big question, I do want to ask you just to focus a little bit on purpose, because what I'm finding right now is with work being, we're in a high kind of stress season. Students are getting ready to register for classes. Students are expressing frustration at certain things. We're having certain systemic issues that we need to improve in the future. Our systems, that just, again, a lot of transition in all career spaces of people leaving and new people taking on new roles, and that part has really been a part that I've been trying to really meditate on, which is, okay, when a student has an upset email they send to me or a colleague, or when I'm stressed out because I'm in meetings till 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, and then working on Saturdays and Sundays, 7 days a week, 6-7 days a week, I center around purpose as well. Like at my best, I am. And so, for you is, you talked about purpose, and for you, as you work with students to identify their purpose, you've clearly done it with your community and civic engagement role. And I'm guessing you're doing it now. Without being too redundant here, I'll edit it out if it is. I'd just like to get just a little bit more of your take on the idea of, like, how do people identify their purpose? How do they kind of figure out what's important to them so that they can connect that to how they get involved on college campuses, or how they get involved in a career, or even in their communities and volunteering? Yeah. How would you encourage somebody to identify their purpose?
Well, my students laugh at me now. Even the ones who are older and have graduated always say, "Now, what would Christie Poteet ask you?" And that is, if money was an option, I'm going to pay you $100,000 to do anything in the world. What would you do? What if money was, I'm just going to give it to you. I'm writing you a blank check. What would you do? And sometimes students say, I would, raise puppies. Okay, well, you may not make $100,000 raising puppies. So like, but what is it about puppies that you really love? Like, what's the joy that brings you? What is it that you really love about that? And then what skills do you bring to that? And what strengths do you have that contribute to that? And then how do we channel that into something that's a career for you? And I don't say a job, because students come here sometimes thinking they just need to get a job, especially if you're low income, because you're thinking money, I got to get out. These are the things I got to do. This is expensive. But a career to me is thinking about the big picture. What is it that you want to contribute to the world if money wasn't an option? And then how do we find a way for you to make money doing that? And there's always a way. And it may not be that you get to raise puppies, but maybe instead we find a way for you to channel that love that you have, or that passion that you have, or that feeling you have when you are, doing what you love, into something that makes sense for you career-wise. I think sometimes we limit ourselves into what others have defined as important or valuable careers, and we don't look for opportunities to think outside of the box about possibility. And that sound like leadership right now. Challenge what is, look to what could be.
Yes,
right?
Yes.
So thinking about how do you challenge yourself and thinking about what is possible. But that first question is, if you weren't thinking about money, and we're all thinking about money, but put it to the side, I'm going to give you $100,000. You got it. It's your thing. What are you going to do? What does that look like for you? And then how do we turn that into something that makes sense?
That's it. That's great advice. I think, I think you're doing it. And I think I'm doing it, and I think it's our job to help others do the same thing. All right, so with that being said, we'll take a quick break, and then we'll get to the big question. All right, so if this is your first time listening to an episode, or if it's your 43rd episode you've listened to, this is the Best Worst Thing podcast, where the part where we ask our guests to share a personal or professional story that gives an example of a setback. So the questions are, what was the situation or setback? How did you get through it? And then what did you learn along the way that you want the listeners to take away? So Dr. Poteet, what is your best worst thing?
I want to talk about two things. The first thing I would like to speak on is this idea of imposter syndrome. And as I was thinking about this question, I was having a hard time pinpointing one experience that may have set me back. And as I kept thinking about, like, what are the things that I have dealt with that have kind of made me stop or pause? And each time it was this feeling of, maybe I don't belong here. Maybe I'm not contributing. Maybe I'm not doing the work that needs to be done. Maybe I'm just making all this up in my head and so I can sleep better at night, that I'm actually creating change. And I think about when I was in the 8th, 7th grade, middle school sometime, I went to an awards ceremony. And I told this story at my dissertation defense a couple of weeks ago. And at this event, I gave the Pledge of Allegiance because they just needed someone to do it. And one of my friends looked at me and said, "Is that why you came? Is that why you're here?" Because in that moment, she saw me, and I assume that she saw my socioeconomic status because I lived in government-assisted housing. She knew I was poor, and I wasn't supposed to be in that space. I wasn't supposed to be receiving that award. And there are many times throughout my life where I've kind of felt like I wasn't supposed to be there because I was low income, or because I have a thick country accent, or because, other things that maybe showed up in that space, my own insecurities. And those things made me stop and question my ability and my knowledge. And when I reflect on that now, I think, I can't believe that even happened. But it does happen. It happened 2 days ago, because I'm dealing with a situation at work now that is very emotional for me. And I found myself in a space where I was surrounded by all men who are very supportive of me and my career. But I was very emotional, and I felt that I was about to cry. And I immediately thought, do not cry in this space with all of these men, because they will see you as weak. And I thought, how did I get it? Like, I am at the top of my game right now, but I'm still having this moment of doubt and stopping in my shoes because maybe I feel like because I'm emotional, I don't belong at this table, or because I can't have emotion. And then I started to think all of these things are just ways that dominant narratives have been used to gatekeep my experience and to keep me where maybe those with privilege wanted me to be. And by taking a moment to kind of reflect on that, to own it, and to say, no, I still belong here. I'm supposed to be here. I've earned the right to be here. I have all the knowledge and skills and talents it takes to be here. I'm shattering those ceilings, and I am paving the way for others. So just because I was first doesn't mean that I should be the last. And so what I take away from these moments is sit with those feelings, own them. They're going to continue to happen. And then think about all the great things that you've done and how you can continue to pave ways for other people to move forward. That's one way I feel like I've had multiple setbacks that I've created for myself. Mm. And in other ways, people have created them for me. But really, it's me, self-doubt, imposter syndrome, thinking that I don't belong because of my own insecurities or my own doubt. But we could spend a whole podcast on that too. The other situation is something that I struggle with too. As a professional, sometimes I'm in a situation where I feel like I'm having to negotiate parts of my identity or my values or beliefs so that I can create spaces where I am welcoming and accepting and encouraging of all people. And what I mean by that is 2 years ago, the political climate was very polarized. It still is. But as the director of the Office for Community and Civic Engagement, part of my responsibility was to increase voter education, voter mobilization. And up until that point, I had really used my social media to promote my office, my university. But I had thoughts of my own about the election. And I very much believe in the First Amendment and my right to be who I want to be outside of my university. And so I was sharing some things that I felt very strongly about. And I was called to the carpet on some things about how I was coming across. And my argument was, what do you mean? This is my personal Facebook page. This is my own identity. And while that is true, what I was reminded of, as an educator, I don't ever want to create a space where students who do not agree with me feel like they cannot have conversations with me. And so I started to think about how I was showing up, because I can say that it's my personal page, but because I had blurred those lines already in my professional life, it's hard for people to separate that. And while I do have the right to believe and say what I want, I also want to make sure that if a student doesn't agree, that they still feel comfortable coming to me to have conversations about other things that are going on in their life, that I haven't created this divide that I saw that we see that exist throughout our country. And because students of all walks of life need me. Now, that doesn't mean that I compromise my values or I compromise on issues of social justice. But that setback when I was called to the carpet and, basically said, you're creating some barriers here, I had to really reflect about my own actions and whether or not I was contributing into the conversation in a meaningful way or if I was just serving myself. Mm. And that was hard for me it was a hard pill to swallow, to recognize that you can have an opinion, but were you really contributing in a meaningful way, or were you just fueling the fire and making it worse? And I had to do a lot of self-reflection and came to the place of recognizing I was making it worse, but I had to learn to navigate and balance who I am as a professional and my values and who I want to be as an educator, and find some harmony there. And so I'm kind of dancing around my words a little bit, but the takeaway is don't create, as an educator, we have to be mindful of how we're creating safe spaces for all students, regardless of what their beliefs are, while also staying true to who we are and staying focused on social justice and equity and providing spaces for students to learn.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. So, if you don't mind, I'd love to give some reflections before we wrap up here. The imposter syndrome is something that I think a lot of people have experienced, whether they admit it or not. The idea that I don't belong here. I think some of it also is identity based, whether it's gendered or race or even, being a low income person or growing up low income and questioning your deserving or belonging there. And I appreciate you kind of owning the part where you said, I still belong here regardless. And so creating a space for yourself to feel like you belong, because, we're all borrowing a seat. Let's just be honest, right? Our colleges and universities, most of them have been around longer than us. They all will probably be here longer than we're around and we're not breathing anymore. And so, who really owns the space? Well, the person who owns the space is you. It's the person who's sitting in that space, whether you're occupying, an administrative seat like you, or whether it's, working in corporate America or working at a bank or wherever people work. And so just taking back ownership, and really not wasting your time on the doubt, dealing with it, addressing it, but not dealing with it. I really appreciate you doing that, including also, not filtering who you are and who you need to be. So I think that's really important. So I appreciate that. The second piece about supporting all students. I mean, listen, when the political climate was hot, it still is. It's more like passive aggressive hot right now, or kind of aggressive, but not. But when a couple years ago, 2 years ago, when things were real hot, like I get that. I did the same thing. I posted some of my personal opinions on social media. I wasn't in the same position you were in, and I can imagine though that if my students saw that some of them would feel alienated, because not all of my students have the same opinions that I do, and our role is to be authentic, but our role also is to be of service. And so I appreciate your recognition of saying, like, I need to be there for all students regardless of how they feel. And I don't want to create an environment where students who don't think the same way as I do won't feel uncomfortable because they think I'm shut off based on the way I represent myself publicly. And that's a hard thing. That humble pie, the hard pill to swallow that you referred to, that's a hard one when somebody gives you that feedback. Because my initial reaction is like yours. It's defensive. It's like, wait, what are you talking about? No, absolutely not. This is me. But then, your willingness to sit with it, think about it, and then figure out, okay, how's this getting in the way of what I'm here to do is really important. And so, so I appreciate your vulnerability in sharing that. Sounds like a lot of lessons learned there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I would say that that's a takeaway too, is that you're not perfect, and that's okay. I'm not scared of failure with my students. I tell them to fail all the time and I'll support them through it. So support yourself in your failures and mistakes and mess ups. And that's okay, because that's where we learn and grow.
Oh, that's great. That's really good. I'm holding off here because I want to go into like another hour of conversations about failure, but we'll save that for another time. So Christie, what is the best way? If people want to get a hold of you, want to reach out to you, want to follow you, what's the best way to do that?
I would say if they want to get a hold of me, I would send an email. Okay. cpoteet@uncp.edu, or my personal poteetc@gmail. I use both. But you can also reach out to me on Facebook. I now create that space in a different way. And then I'm on LinkedIn too, but I'm always open to having conversations about how we can do this work in a more meaningful way, so that we can continue to create opportunities for people to create change.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing some time with me.
Yeah, of course. You're very welcome.
Thank you for listening to the Best Worst Thing podcast. I'm your host, Josh Lewa. Music is produced by Josh One. You can follow him at Boomnote on Instagram and Twitter, and Josh One on Spotify. Our episodes are edited by Cooled Jets Music. You can follow him at Cooled Jets Music on Instagram. Our marketing is designed by Francesca Daniels. You can find her at FrankandKitty24 on Instagram. And our overall design is by Inspired Design with Ryan Daniels. You can find them at getinspired.design on Instagram. Thank you for listening to The Best Worst Thing.
This one's for the good times and this one's for the bad. This one's for the day that was the best we ever had. This one's for my good friends. ones who get up on your skin and do not even know.